Started. So first of all, I want to wish everybody a good evening and thank you for joining us for our February Tuesday talks.
Good evening, everyone.
Entitled Understanding Your Conflict Management Style. Before I introduce our guest speaker, a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, please keep yourself muted during Gayle's presentation. So if you haven't muted yourself at this juncture, would you please do so now? Thank you. And if you have questions throughout Gayle's presentation, please put them in the chat box. District Governor Mark Chipman is going to be monitoring the chat box. And after Gayle's presentation, we will have an opportunity for questions and answer. And at the end of tonight's session, I'll give you a little bit of teaser about what to expect at our March Tuesday talks. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gayle Oudeh, who is the Director of Coaching and Training for the Center for Conflict Resolution International, where she utilizes her expertise in interpersonal dynamics, team development, leadership development, and organizational systems in addressing conflict issues in the workplace. As a professional certified coach, Gayle is frequently involved in coaching individuals and teams as they deal with conflict, change, and goal setting. And it's lovely to note that Gayle is a fellow Rotarian. She has served as president of the Rotary Club of Orléans for 2 years, 2017-19. She has served as a zone trainer for the District Governor-elect Partners and as an international training leader at the Rotary International Assembly. She currently serves as a chair for the District Training and Learning Committee, the program chair for District Conference 2020, and the conference chair 2021. Gayle is a Paul Harris Fellow, a major donor, and a member of the Rotary Foundation's Bequest Society. So Gayle, on behalf of members of District 7070, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation tonight.
Thanks so much, Beth. Thank you, everybody. What a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And as the further we go into this, the smaller all your pictures are on my screen. But it's nice to see some familiar faces and, of course, some new faces. And my pleasure in this special month focusing on peace and conflict resolution to be able to talk to you a little bit about conflict management styles. And I've got a slideshow that with some slides I want to show you. And I'm going to, hopefully this is all going to work and I'm going to be able to share my screen. So hang on one second here. And are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Yes, we see your screen.
Perfect, perfect. So the title of this presentation is Understanding Your Conflict Management Style. And I want to start by asking everybody a question, and I want you to put it in the chat. And here's my question, or maybe what I'd like to say is complete this sentence for me with a word or two. When you think about conflict, how would you complete this sentence? Conflict is like what? I asked somebody that question one time and they said, conflict is like a migraine headache. It is just the worst and it's completely debilitating. But for you, conflict is like what? And I'm just gonna, a roadblock, I hear, fear, an unmeeting of the minds. I like that. Death, a bowl of fruit. Very nice. Not fun. An opportunity. Okay. A road to growth. Perfect. An upset stomach. Chaos. I'm seeing a lot of them there. Excellent. Excellent. Well, you keep thinking about that and notice how many of those, I mean, certainly we heard conflict is an opportunity, it's a chance to talk about things, but we also heard a lot of it's chaotic, it's like a stomach ache, we hear a lot of the negative. And for most of us, quite honestly, our first instinct is that conflict is a negative. And what I want to share today and why is there we go, is my definition of conflict. And that is that conflict is a difference. It's just a difference. It's a difference of wants, of needs, of expectations, but it's just a difference. And in and of itself, it's not a positive or a negative. It just is a reality. And I always say, as soon as you've got two people in a room, you're going to have some kind of conflict because they're different people. There will be differences. Now, not all differences are a big deal. Not all conflicts are a big deal. But when you have those differences, some of them can get exacerbated and some of them not so much. In fact, I would even say you don't always need two people in the room to have conflict. I have conflict almost every morning all by myself, because when I go and get up in the morning, get out of bed, and I head into the washroom and I look in the mirror, what I want to see and what I actually see is different. And so I've got a conflict right there, right? So conflicts just are. They are a reality. If I asked a show of hands, and I can't see all of you, but if I asked a show of hands, who has ever not had conflict in their life? Anybody conflict free in their life? I'm hazarding a guess. I wouldn't see any hands. We all experience it, right? We all have those differences. They just are. Well, then why do we want to spend some time talking about how we manage conflict? The reality is, it isn't the only key to resolving a conflict, but it is the biggest key to resolving conflict, because we all behave in a certain way when conflict happens. And the reason that I asked you at the beginning, what do you think of when you think of conflict, is that a lot of times how we view conflict influences our expectations around it, and consequently our experience and how we tend to resolve it. So if you've had a lot of bad experiences with conflict, chances are you're going to keep thinking it's a negative. If you start having some more positive experiences with conflict, that can change. So it can be the key to resolving, but our behavior in conflict, how we manage it, can also be the key to actually escalating the conflict and making it worse. And that's why it's so fundamental and the place we need to start talking about conflict. So when I talk about conflict management styles, I'm going to use the metaphor of the birds. And Beth shared that my organization, my company where I do training and coaching, is Center for Conflict Resolution. Many of you know my husband, Nabil. We actually run this company together. And this is our model for looking at conflict management styles. And you'll see that your style is either the woodpecker style, or the owl, or the hummingbird, the ostrich, or the parakeet. And I'm going to pull each of those apart in a minute and explain each of them separately. And while I do, what I want you to think about are two things. One is, where do you see yourself behaving most of the time? And chances are you'll say, well, I do that a lot, but I don't do it all the time. And that's perfectly normal. But where do you usually land in terms of conflict management styles? But the second question is, what is your Rotary Club full of? What kind of birds? And what kind of conflict management styles are there in your Rotary Club? Because how we manage conflict and how we deal with it is going to come up against another person's style. And that's where sometimes it's easy to resolve and sometimes it's really difficult. A lot of times when we say, you know, that person, they're just really difficult, it has to do with the fact that we're managing the situation so differently. So just before I go into detail about each one of those, what I wanted you to note is the grid that these styles are on. And you'll see on the left-hand side, the column, it talks about focus on self. and on the bottom is focus on other. And what we mean by that is the focus on self is that in conflict, many people have a tendency to believe that my way is the right way. They want to get things done the right way. And guess who knows the right way? I do. And so when the focus is on self, it's also generally people will talk about, yeah, but I just want to get this right. I just want to do it the right way. And some styles are more focused on that. The focus on other has to do more with focusing on the relationship. And there are some people who are more focused on making sure that we're getting along through all of this, that this conflict isn't going to impact our relationship, or that we'll still be friends at the end of it. And so that's why we talk about focus on the other. And you'll see there that the woodpecker, more extremely concerned about focus on self, less about other. On the opposite end, the parakeet, much more focused on other, much less focused on self. The owl in the top corner, equally focused on both. The ostrich at the other corner, not focused on either one. And the hummingbird in the middle. So already maybe some of you are starting to think, oh yeah, I tend to operate more this way or that way. Let me say that none of them is always right, and none of them is always wrong. There's a plus side to each of these styles. There's a time and a place for all of them. There is also times and places where they're not effective and not useful. And so that's all part of understanding our style too. If I understand that I tend to operate like this, but here's where it gets me in trouble, that's when we can start to learn other styles. And that's part of all of this. These are actually learned approaches. They're not just one way. We're not stuck in a rut by any means. Chances are whatever style you have, you've learned it along the way. And it may be from the way conflict was dealt with in your family. It may be in the workplace for you, how people expect conflict to be dealt with in the workplace. I had a fellow tell me one time, he said, I think I was always a parakeet. I grew up with a lot of parakeets, but when I got into the line of work I got into, it was really clear that parakeets would not survive in that work environment. And so I had to change my style. So we learn them along the way, which also means we can change them. So let's have a little bit more in-depth look at each of them and get a little sense of how they operate. And we're going to start with the woodpecker. Now, I always like to explain why we call this style the woodpecker. And one of the things that I found out about woodpeckers, I mean, we all know woodpeckers are those birds, and they find a place like on a tree trunk or something like that, and they hammer away at it until they get what they want. And some woodpeckers are going after insects in the bark, some are going after sap, but they're going to hammer away until they get what they want. There's actually been a great deal of research done on the fact that woodpeckers also will like hammer away at drain pipes or hammer away at siding. And so they've done research on why is that? Surely the woodpecker knows there's not an insect in that siding, or there's not sap in that drain pipe. Why do they keep hammering away? And you know what the research showed? That they just like the noise. They just like the noise. And woodpeckers who that operate in conflict are kind of the same thing. A lot of times they just kind of like to stir the pot and see what happens. They're not afraid of conflict. They like I said, like to get things started sometimes and just kind of ruffle people's feathers a little bit to move the metaphor that much further. And I'll give you a quick example that a friend of mine shared with me. And she was out for lunch with another friend. And there was a special soup or salad and your entree. And she ordered the soup with her entree. It was a busy day. The waitress came out with a salad. She said, I didn't order the salad, sent it back. Took a while, was very busy. As I said, guess what? The waiter came out again, salad again. She was not happy. Take it away. I didn't order the salad, she said. He comes out, or the waitress comes out a third time. Guess what she's got now? She's got the entree, not the soup or the salad. By that time, this woman was, I want to speak to the manager. I'm very upset, made her wishes known. And guess what? She not only got her meal free, she got a gift certificate for another meal there. And what she said at the end of the lunch, yeah, wasn't really hungry for soup or salad. Didn't really care. Didn't eat either one. But it was the principle of the thing. I ordered the salad, or sorry, I ordered the soup. I should get the soup. And again, that's kind of the epitome of the way a woodpecker will operate. Like I said, not scared of conflict, not hesitant to get what they want, very single-minded, very stubborn, very determined. And frequently you'll hear a woodpecker talk about, well, it's the principle of the thing. I argued for the principle. It really wasn't that important, but you know, it was wrong, so I needed to say so. And what happens when you use that style a lot? Well, if you remember that grid, remember they were high on concern for self, not very high on concern for the other. And quite frankly, the woodpecker style, if you use that, overuse it, it can really impact relationships. People start backing away from woodpeckers who are always going to find fault, always find a reason to argue. But at the same time, there's a time and a place for woodpeckers. And I wish we could interact a little bit more. And I'd ask you, where in your experience has that style been useful? But I'll give you a couple of examples when it makes sense. So there's some times where somebody just has to make a decision, and you know, it's not a popularity contest. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It doesn't matter if people are going to be happy with it or not. You got to do what's right, and you do it. Woodpecker sometimes it has to take that approach. Sometimes the principle is truly important. Some of the really significant changes in the world have occurred because people have taken a woodpecker style. Mother Teresa, when it came to poverty, was a woodpecker. And she kept hammering away and didn't give anybody any space to argue with her. She was determined to do what she saw as the right way and the right thing to do, and was not negotiable on that. So there's a time and a place for that. Now let's look at the opposite. The parakeet, remember, was in that other corner of the grid. You might be in conflict right this very minute with a parakeet and you won't even know it, because parakeets will remain friendly. They will talk to you. They'll try to be as agreeable as possible. They won't deny that there's conflict. It's not that they'll deny it, but because they're so determined to maintain a relationship, you'll have the parakeet trying to minimize the impact of the conflict. And so you'll see the parakeet doing things like, oh, well, I have a slight disagreement with that, but nothing critical, not a big deal. Or they might kind of cajole you or try and make a humorous comment about the conflict. And there's times where it looks maybe like an underhanded dig. One person told me one time, I think they're armed parakeets because their friendliness can come across as kind of those digs or a way of getting under your skin. But parakeets really honestly want to keep looking at the silver lining and say, you know what, yeah, maybe we disagree, but it's surely not as bad as it could be, or this really isn't as big a deal as some people think it is. It's just a small thing. If we could just fix this little thing. And the other thing that you're going to find from parakeets, because of that, because they want things to be small, they want the relationship to be maintained, they are also the most agreeable, and they are the ones that are the quickest to give in to other people when they have conflict with them. Some people like to have parakeets around for that very reason, because they'll, you know, you can imagine the woodpecker saying, it's got to be my way, it's got to be the way I want it. The parakeet's the one that's most likely to say, okay, we'll do it your way. If that's gonna maintain the relationship, we'll do it your way. So some of you, maybe that's a fit. Now, just like I said, for the woodpecker, there's a time and a place for the parakeet, and there's a problem when that's the only way you deal with conflict. So time and a place, you know what, guess what? Sometimes relationships really are that important, and it just makes sense to give in. Maybe it is a conflict and it truly isn't something that is of great importance to you. And you go, you know what? This is clearly more important to you than it is to me. Sure, let's just do it your way. Fine. And we'll still be friends at the end, and we'll get to the other side of this, and it's all good. But if you take that approach all the time, if you're always the one that's giving in, guess what? After a little while, you can feel like a real doormat. And again, a real quick story. I'm just watching my time and making sure I have time to tell you a story. But I was doing a training one time and talking about these birds, and afterwards a woman came to me and she told me, she said, you know, I've lived most of my married life as a parakeet. And she said, I always believed that it was really important that if my husband and I disagreed, that we never went to bed mad, that we always worked it out before we went to bed. And she said, and we were married for 20 something years and you know, lived by that rule. And she said, but now upon reflection, she said, I realized it was always me giving in. It was me being the parakeet and saying, you know what, we can't let this go on. So guess what? We'll just do it your way. You know, clearly this is, and she said, I always would say, clearly this is more important to you than it is to me. Let's do it your way and put this away. Until she had one particular circumstance, and she said they became empty nesters. She decided she wanted to go back to school and become a teacher. And where she could get that teaching degree at that time, she would have to commute. So she'd have to go away for school for the week and come back home on the weekends. And she told her husband that she wanted to do that. And he just looked at her and said, no, you're not doing that. And she said, no, like I really want to do this. And he said, no. And she told me, she said, I did it anyway. I got registered. I got signed up. She said, I was packing up the car for that first week of school. And even that whole time while I'm packing up, my husband's saying, you're not going. You're not going. And she said, I went. And I came home the first weekend. And he said, you're not going back. You're not going back. And I went back. And she says, it was the first time ever that I stuck to what I wanted and to my needs and my wants, and didn't give in to what he wanted. And the unfortunate thing is, she said, all that time, all those 20 something years of being a parakeet and always trying to accommodate him, she said, our marriage and our relationship was destroyed because it couldn't survive me once not giving in. And by December of that year, they were divorced. So if you use that style exclusively all the time, that very thing that parakeets want, those relationships, are actually weak and can't survive it. So time and a place for it, absolutely. but using it all the time, it actually goes at cross purposes of what parakeets want. Now, let's look at the owl. And there may be many people that are thinking, yeah, that owl looked pretty good. Remember, it was on that grid, high on concern for the other, high on concern for self. Surely that's the best way to make sure that everybody is happy, right? And if you think about it, owls, the birds, are those birds that they will sit on a branch for a long period of time. They have incredibly good hearing, incredibly good eyesight. They can turn their heads almost 360 degrees around. They want to be very aware of their surroundings. Well, people who operate like owls in conflict are the same. They want to discuss everything. They want to understand everything. They want to make sure that they're finding a solution to the situation that is the right solution, that they're happy with, that meets their personal needs, and also happy, it makes the other person happy, meets the other person's needs, and maintains the relationship. So what could possibly be wrong with that? Well, the third point there is an important point. It's an incredibly slow process to get through conflict as an owl. So if you want to understand everything about what's concerning the other person and make sure that all their needs are met, and you want to make sure they understand what your concerns are and meet all of your needs, that can take a while. So, if Nabil and I are, saying what's for dinner and it's 5:30 and we're both hungry and I say, let's do takeout. I want Chinese down the road. And he said, no, I want Italian from the Italian place. Well, we've got a conflict, right? If we were going to operate like owls in that situation, we'd starve. We'd never get dinner. Because if I needed to fully understand and have him explain to me the value of Italian food for dinner and all the reasons why he wants it, and then make sure he also understands why I want Chinese and how important that is to me, and we want to find a solution to that problem, it's going to take a while. And it's not every conflict is worth the time. The other aspect of being an owl, and I always say this because a lot of people like to see themselves as owls, and hey, I listen to everybody, I look at the whole situation, I try to understand everything that's going on, I try to find a solution that works for everybody. But what also can happen in conflict is when somebody's trying so hard to be an owl, the others in the conflict can actually feel really manipulated by that. And I have seen that happen. So in my work, I operate often facilitating kind of a mediated conversation. And I watched an owl in action a little while ago. And so these two individuals were in conflict, one clearly an owl, the other one clearly not. And the owl, when asked him to explain where he was at with the situation, told us at great length, here's what happened, here's how I feel about it, here's why I feel that way, explained the whole situation. And then I turned to the other individual and asked them to share. And I said, well, I don't really have a lot to say, I just want this to be over. We'll talk about what that style is in a minute. And guess what the owl did? The owl said, well, I imagine that when I said this, that probably really bothered you. And you probably wanted to tell me this. And so I would have responded like this, which I'm sure would have irritated you. And so I'm thinking that probably how you're feeling is quite upset and frustrated with me. And basically what was happening is the one owl wanting the dialogue, wanting to work out the situation and wanting to communicate was putting words in the mouth of the other person, not necessarily accurately. And as a result, that person can just feel manipulated and pushed in a corner because the owl so badly wants to communicate and have that conversation and that dialogue. Now, as I said, there's times and places for all of these, right? There is absolutely a time and a place for an owl behavior. If conflict is long-standing, if it is really entrenched and significant, if both getting it right and maintaining relationships is important, then the owl approach makes a lot of sense. Let's take the time. Let's talk this all through. Let's give everybody a chance to explain. Let's make sure we really understand everybody's position, all of that, but also recognize that it's going to take a lot of time. That is a long, in-depth process that isn't worth it in every conflict. It just doesn't make sense for everyone. And in fact, if you try to operate like that all the time in conflict, you'll be dealing with conflict situations all the time because it takes so much effort and so much investment. Now, opposite extreme on that grid I was showing you is the ostrich. And we all have a vision of the ostrich, sticks their head in the sand. Well, they don't actually stick their head in the sand. They just put their head low to the ground, thinking that, you know, if a threat's approaching, if they put their head down, they won't be noticed. Right? That's what ostriches, the birds, do. Well, I always think that's kind of funny because the biggest part of the ostrich is the body, and it's still pretty obvious out there, even if their head's down to the ground. And quite honestly, that's sort of the way it operates for ostriches and people that operate like ostriches in conflict, is that they just want to avoid. They just want to, you know, put their head to the ground, and maybe you won't notice me. And maybe I don't have to talk about this, and maybe I don't have to acknowledge that it's happening. And ostriches, people who operate like ostriches, will often do that physically. So, you know, you have that Rotary meeting, and they know that a contentious topic is going to come up. They might not show. They might just say, you know what, I'm busy that day, or I'm sick, can't make it. If they do come, didn't maybe expect things to get contentious, and then it does. They're going to be the ones that you know, make sure that they don't make eye contact with anybody. You know, I started out my career as a junior high school teacher, and that's a standard approach, right? You don't know the answer that the teacher asks, make sure you don't make eye contact, because then maybe they won't notice you're there. And you can see that in meetings and in situations when something gets a little bit more difficult. The ostriches, they're busy suddenly looking at their papers, trying to avoid eye contact because maybe no one will call on them and ask their opinion. And if they do get pushed and they do need to give an opinion, they're going to hightail it out of there as fast as they can. They will run. And ostriches, the birds, fast runners. Well, people who operate like that in conflict too, pretty fast at getting out of there as well. You'll notice it also says they're a powerful kicker. Those legs that allow them to run so fast also allow them to kick very hard. And people who operate like ostriches can do that also. So if you really corner them and don't allow them to avoid the conflict, it may come out how they really feel about things, and it's never nice because they want to bottle that in. They want to pretend it's not there, and finally they can't, and out it comes, and it's hurtful and it's nasty, and so that's that part. Now, that sounds all bad. That sounds like, oh, don't want any of that, right? Why would anybody be an ostrich? But the reality is there is a time and a place for that. Now, if any of you have ostrich tendencies, if you think maybe you are a little bit of an ostrich, then maybe don't listen to this. But those of you who clearly are not ostriches, this is important. Sometimes it is best to just walk away and pretend you weren't even there. Sometimes the issue, the conflict, whatever is going on, is really none of your business. and not something you should get involved in. Now, I always say that carefully, because if you have some ostrich tendencies, ostriches will say, well, of course, there's hardly any conflict that's worth my investment of time and energy. Of course I should walk away. And so those who operate like ostriches, we usually have to convince them, yeah, okay, there's only very few conflicts that are worth avoiding and walking away from. But for those who don't tend to walk away from a fight ever, it's good to remind them, you know what? It isn't always your business. It isn't always something you need to get involved in. And sometimes it's worth it to be a temporary ostrich. I don't know if any of you, your mother told you to think, count to 10 before you said something in the heat of the moment. Yeah, that's being a temporary ostrich. Just take a moment. Let things settle for a little bit before you're ready to say something. And it's not a long-term ostrich behavior, but a little bit of avoiding and ignoring for the moment, not always a bad thing. Of course, if you do it all the time, guess what? Just builds and builds and builds. Conflict doesn't go away by ignoring it, ever. Last but not least, the hummingbird that was in the middle. And I love talking about the hummingbird. It's so fitting to talk about it as a hummingbird. If you've ever watched a hummingbird in flight, you'll notice that, not only are their wings moving so fast, they're just a blur, but they will, they'll go from one flower to the other. They'll move around. Hummingbirds are the only bird that you can't really predict where they're going to go to next. They'll go this direction and that direction and this direction and that direction, and they'll hover over a plant for a flower for a little bit, and then they'll move over somewhere else, and you'll think, oh, they're going to go there next, but they don't. They go some other direction, and they just keep moving around, and they do it really quickly. And people who operate like hummingbirds in conflict are the same. Their preoccupation, or what's most important to a hummingbird, is to resolve the conflict as quickly as possible. And because they want to deal with it quickly, and by quickly, I don't mean they don't want to give in. So it's not, okay, we'll just do it your way like the parakeet will do, but they want to find a solution that everybody's going to at least be able to live with. We talk about doing things with consensus. And there's different kinds of consensus. You can do the kinds of consensus where everybody agrees. You put something out there and we say, okay, we've got to have consensus on this. We've got to get to a point where everybody agrees. Well, I always say, I think consensus is not necessarily everybody agrees, but consensus is really everybody can either agree or live with it, right? And that's very much a hummingbird way of thinking. Can you live with it? So you might not be totally happy with this, but at least you can live with it. And so hummingbirds love to negotiate and find some sort of middle ground, some opportunity for agreement partway through, and do it quickly. Hummingbird, you say 10, I say 5, let's go with 7.5 and move on. That's where hummingbirds like to be. Let's just do it and move on. Now, again, sounds good. We can find something that everybody can live with, and we can get rid of this conflict quickly. Where does the hummingbird approach become problematic? Well, the reality is that sometimes that quick fix isn't the best fix. In fact, quite often, that quick fix is a Band-Aid solution. Now, that's not always a problem. Remember the scenario I gave you. Nabil wants Italian food, and I want Chinese for dinner. Well, to be a couple of owls and spend the next 3-4 hours talking about what we're going to have for dinner doesn't make sense. A hummingbird approach probably will. Well, you want Italian, I want Chinese. You know what? Subway is the closest place. Let's just go get a couple of subs and eat and move on. That's a hummingbird solution to it. And it probably works, and it's fine. We'll get fed, we'll move on, it'll be okay. until next time we disagree about what to have for dinner, right? And so sometimes that's okay. That's, some conflicts, yeah, I'm going to have to deal with this again. No big deal. That's fine. And we'll do the same thing again and again and again. And we'll just come up with a quick fix and negotiate something. It's all good. But there are some solutions that need a little bit more time, a little bit more effort. Somebody once told me the scenario of a mother with 2 young children, and they got the last Oreo cookie in the bag, and both kids want that Oreo cookie. What does a good hummingbird mother do? Quick fix. Break the cookie in half, give each one half. Great. Each got at least something, not nothing. And neither of the kids are happy. And one says, but Mom, I just wanted the black stuff on the outside. And the other one goes, but Mom, I just wanted the white stuff on the inside. And Mom says, if only I'd asked more questions, talked a little further, we could have come up with an even better solution that would have made them completely happy. And so that's kind of what happens with hummingbirds. Quick fix, sometimes that's good enough, and sometimes you don't come to the best solution. Now, I started off by telling you, think about yourselves. Where do you see yourself? Where do you see some of the people around you, especially in your Rotary Club? Do you have a lot of owls? Do you have some woodpeckers in there? Do you have some ostriches? What have you got? And like I said, none of them are absolute. People don't operate just like that one style all the time. But here's what happens, and I alluded to that a little bit. I was talking about the woodpecker and the parakeet and that interaction, right? So if you've got a woodpecker and a parakeet in conflict, what's the most likely outcome? The woodpecker is going to get their way because they're going to be loud and they're going to hammer and say, it's got to be this way, it's got to be this way. And the parakeet is most likely to say, okay, it's not worth the time and energy. Let's do it your way. And move on. But some of the other combinations, not so easy. An owl and an ostrich, not such an easy combination to come to a resolution with. Woodpecker and an ostrich, not so easy to come to a solution because the ostrich just doesn't want to get involved. They just don't want to have anything to do with it. And so this is why your style can be the key to resolving the conflict or can be part of escalating it, depending on how you're operating in the situation and how others are operating. So what's important about all of this? Well, if you have some understanding of how you tend to operate in conflict, for one, once you know and once you're aware, you also have the opportunity to say, in this particular situation, is this style going to help me resolve the situation or not? So for example, is it the kind of situation where in fact getting it right and being very task oriented and is that principle of it really so significant that you have to be the woodpecker, and even if the relationships don't get maintained at the end, that's important? I'm sure we've got a lot of parents on here, and you can think as a parent, there are times and places to be a woodpecker, right? If my kid's playing with matches, I'm going to grab them out of their hands and say, don't do that. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to discuss it. We're not going to debate it. I'm just going to say, no, you can't. That's a very woodpecker approach, but it's a dangerous situation. It makes sense. My kid and my kids are grown, so I can talk about them this way. But my daughter, when she was a teenager, she'd walk out of her bedroom some morning with some wild outfits to school, and I looked. I said, you can't be serious. You can't go to school dressed like that. Well, if I had taken a woodpecker approach in that case and said, no, you can't wear that. Go back to your room and change. guess what happens? Soon I've got a daughter, for one, who doesn't tell me anything, probably packs her clothes in her backpack and changes once she gets to school, right? In that kind of a situation, yeah, the relationship is way more important. And I did what every good parakeet did, and I smiled and said, have a great day. And I hope you don't freeze in that outfit in the middle of winter, but off you go to school, right? So we really need to think about what's most important in this particular situation. Is it getting the right answer, or is it the relationship? Is it really both? And we really need to take the time, like the owl approach. Or is it something we can just find a quick fix for now so we can move on? Then maybe the hummingbird approach. And if it's really not that important at all, and it's really none of your business, then let's not even get started, and let's just pretend it never happened, and let's take that ostrich approach. So there's a time and a place for all of them. You can learn all of them. You're not stuck in any one style, but whatever is most comfortable for you, also think about what's least comfortable for you. What do you maybe need to practice a little bit, learn a little bit, where that might be helpful for you at times. And I'm looking at our time, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and see if there's some questions or some dialogue we can have about that and conflict management styles, and maybe how that plays a role for all of you.
If there's any questions, feel free to just speak up or put it in the chat, and I'll speak on your behalf.
I had you all so mesmerized you didn't have any questions so far. That's great.
We have to kick things off.
I see a hand. I see Virginia's got her hand up.
Hi, Virginia, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Gayle. Question is, how do you actually identify your predominant style?
Well, I'll put in a shameless plug. We have a personal assessment you can actually take that will identify it, and you can always connect with me afterwards, and I can help you access that. But if you think about conflicts that you've had over time, and a lot of times the easiest thing to think about is in family situations. So, if you're married with a spouse, if you have children, think about the conflicts you've had with your children, and how does it tend to go? Well, what seems to happen? What's the pattern that happens over and over again? Take a little time to reflect, and it wouldn't take too long, and you'd be able to identify, oh yeah, I tend to do this a lot. If you're really not sure what kind of style you have, you're probably not a woodpecker. Most woodpeckers know it. But you can also ask somebody else. They may also be willing to tell you, yeah, you tend to operate like this.
Gayle, I have a question from chat from Eric Jagger. He said, how do you relate this to political conflict and diplomacy?
Big question. Even countries, groups, special interest groups, they also operate in certain styles. They also tend to have certain approaches, and quite frankly, the dynamics are the same. If you think about diplomacy, think about when people think, are the relationships between these countries or between these entities important? You'll see them operating more like owls, sometimes like parakeets. I hate to bring politics into this, but we were just talking about US politics before we started on this. I could probably identify pretty quickly Trump's approach, and quite frankly didn't care a lot about relationships, and he would say that frequently. I don't care if they don't like us, they need to respect us, we need to do this. Well, guess what happens? It starts looking like bullying, and nobody does respect it. So even internationally, you see these dynamics at play for sure.
So I assume you're suggesting Trump is a woodpecker?
Yes, I would say he is.
So the next question is, how do you resolve a conflict between two trumps or two woodpeckers? That was from Basil.
Good question. Good question. So here's the thing between two woodpeckers is that if they keep hammering away, the better, stronger woodpecker will win, right? But here's the other option is that one or both of them can move. And this happens sometimes. Now, what the woodpecker wants is to get their own way. And in my line of work, we're frequently called in, and I frequently am told, you know, this person's a woodpecker all the time. I mean, they don't use that language, but that's what they've described. And consequently, you know, they've made a lot of enemies. They're really problematic. Gayle, go and fix them. We need to fix them. Well, the reality is a woodpecker is going to stay a woodpecker unless the style doesn't work for them. So long as somebody is basically bullying their way in, they'll keep, why would they change? Why would they change if it keeps working for them? So in the long run, the only way you're going to resolve that is to have each of them change their approach. And a lot of times with woodpeckers, the only way you're going to get them to change is to be so stubborn as to not allow them to get their way. I say that it's hard to do. It is not easy to do, but that is really the key to dealing with woodpeckers.
Yeah. I've got a question here from incoming AG Gord Wallace from Bowenville. Gord states, our club is about 50 members who mostly get along, but we have cliques or people who gravitate to each other more than others. We have a few people who are usually in conflict. What do you suggest we do in that situation?
Well, not knowing some of the reasons why they're in conflict and not knowing more about it, I hesitate to give you too significant advice, but here's the thing is that if you ignore it and pretend it's not there, the problem is that it'll just bubble away, and at some point it will explode, and so you can't ignore it. But there's two sides of this, and it gets a little complicated, but one is not to ignore it and to acknowledge it. And a lot of times, and one of the reasons why we developed the birds metaphor in the first place is that it's kind of an easier, funner way of talking about conflict. And we can kind of call on people's approaches a little bit, or even make a joke. You know, I think I got to be a little bit more of an ostrich in this situation, or I think I got to try and do the parakeet thing. And if we can start having some vocabulary around conflict, and you remember I said at the beginning, it's just a difference. It's not good or bad. So let's not assume right away it's a bad thing. Let's just assume it's an opportunity to understand each other better. Well, you know, and then we look at the styles and go, okay, well, you know what, maybe that approach isn't working so well. Let's try something else. We can generate some conversation about that. At the same time, for those of you who maybe it's not a few people who don't get along, or it's something a lot longer lasting and is just simmering below the surface in your club, and you know it's just a matter of time, and it may explode. The other piece of it is that we have to be careful that the negativity, the conflict, the what I call the grumpy people, the unhappiness people, that does not get more airtime than the positive. So we also can't focus solely on what's wrong and what's bad. So even while we acknowledge that there is conflict, let's talk about it as something neutral, something we can all get around and fix. And let's also spend significant time reminding each other about what's positive and what's good here, because we've got to balance it out. If we spend all our time trying to deal with the negative, and that's all we do, it has this way of continuing on, And so we do need to balance it out with the positive as well.
All right, Beth, how are we doing for time?
We've got 5 minutes left, Mark, so we could probably have maybe one more question, and then I'll turn it to you to thank. And then
Okay.
I will introduce next month's Tuesday Talks.
All right. Now, this is more of a common set of question. I don't know if this is a Joe Biden fan or not, but person said, what's Joe Biden's approach? Is it roasted chicken? So I don't know. That's just a comment. The other question for Jean-Claude, which bird would be considered assertive? And how does being assertive not affect conflict management?
Oh, okay. Good question. It would depend on how you think about assertive. I think a lot of people naturally assume that it's the woodpecker that's more assertive. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. In fact, woodpeckers sometimes are very non-assertive, and I've heard many woodpeckers say, you know what, I'm just not going to talk to you until you agree with me. And they walk away. They're not ignoring. They're not being an ostrich. They're just saying, once you agree with me, come back. we'll talk some more. And so they aren't always assertive. Assertive can be a really good thing. Owls can be very assertive. Even ostriches in their refusal to acknowledge the conflict can be very assertive about it. So it depends on what you're talking about in terms of how they're being assertive. I was going to say probably the least assertive is the parakeet, but even sometimes in their determination to look at the bright side and keep things rosy, they can be pretty in your face about it. So they all have that aspect of being assertive potentially.
Very good. Well, I'm going to stop it there. I know we're just going to talk about our next Tuesday Talks, but I just want to thank you, Gayle. Give a big District 7070 thank you. And judging by all the thank yous that I'm seeing in the chat, everybody, your talk was well received. I've always thought of personality styles, but I really haven't given a lot of thought to conflict management styles. And I'm sure I see a lot of leaders, a lot of presidents, a lot of committee leaders, et cetera, on Zoom tonight. I think everybody would agree, managing conflict is a big part of what we do in Rotary and in our various roles. And it's probably something we should spend a bit more time training and learning about. And by the way, my wife says a big hi. She's in the background. She was one of your
Great. Say hi back.
and so I know firsthand that you're a fantastic trainer. So thank you for that. You're always welcome to come back and speak again or join us in the district. And I just want to let you know that we'll also be making a donation to the Rotary Foundation on your behalf for your talk tonight. So thank you very much. And once again, a big 7070 thank you, Gayle.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Absolutely.
Okay, so Gayle, my personal thanks for your presentation tonight, and it was great, and you can tell by all the comments and the questions that it was a very interesting and worthwhile topic for our Tuesday Talks. So our March Tuesday Talk is all about youth services. So we're going to talk about Rotaract, Interact, Early Act, Youth Exchange, and RILA. So please join us to learn more about what District 7070 is doing in each of these different youth services areas. And just a note to remember to register so that Charles can send you the Zoom link, and we'll see you in a month's time. And it's actually going to be on my birthday.
Oh, good. 39.
Hey,
29.
don't I
29.
wish?
29.
Charles and I already had that conversation.
All right. All right.
Anyway,
well,
thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Stay well, stay safe, and a special thank you again to Gayle.
We had 107 members tonight. Thanks a lot, Gayle. I appreciate
Perfect.
everybody who attended.
Thank you, Gayle.
Thank you.
Good to
Thanks,
see you.
Gayle.
Thanks.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night,
It was
everyone.
great.
No, anybody fall asleep? Charles, we have to wake up.
No, I think we're good. I'm not too sure about these people that are on the phone there.
Did I
Still looking at the comments.
Oh, okay.
did I
Got us
tell you
worried
this?
there, Mike.
Did I tell you the story the other day? I was giving a talk at a club, and the plan was after the talk I was going to formally induct somebody into Rotary. So I did my talk, and then I said to the president, "Okay, are we ready for the induction?" And the president says, "I'm not sure if that's going to happen." So I looked over to the person who I was supposed to be inducting, and they were fast asleep on the camera. They had their head down, fast asleep, snoring logs, fast asleep. We all tried to wake this person, didn't we? So we knew it was being recorded. So we said, the hell with it. We'll still induct him anyway. You can watch the recording later. So I proceeded to induct this guy. It's the first time I ever inducted somebody who was fast asleep, but that happened. So the guy woke up later and he was a good sport about it. We had a good laugh, a laugh that we needed during COVID. It was a big laugh, and was never experienced that before in my life. So
All right. I'm going to wrap things up now. If that's
all right, Mike
okay,
Miller,
guys.
take it easy yourself.
Take care, folks.
Have a great night.
Guys, bye-bye.